There's a quiet moment. Most people miss it. It happens when you stop checking your phone to see if they replied. When you stop adjusting your words so they'll like you. When you stop shrinking, explaining, proving, chasing. And in that moment, something strange happens. The energy shifts. Because the truth is simple but uncomfortable. The more you seek validation, the less valuable you appear. And the moment you stop seeking it, they feel the absence. That's when they start chasing. This isn't manipulation, it's psychology, it's human nature, and it's power, real grounded power. Let's break it down. When you reach outward for validation, something subtle happens inside you. It's not loud, it doesn't announce itself. It's a quiet shift in posture, in tone, in energy. You start asking questions you already know the answers to. You look for confirmation in other people's faces before you trust your own instincts. And without realizing it, you hand over the authority of your worth to someone else. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. We all want to be seen. We all want to matter. That part is natural. But when validation becomes a requirement instead of a bonus, it changes how people experience you. It turns confidence into a question mark. And people can feel that, even if they can't explain it. Think about it. Real confidence doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't lean forward hoping to be approved. It stands still, calm, grounded. It doesn't rush to explain itself because it trusts its own presence. Validation seeking, on the other hand, moves fast. It over-explains. It fills silence. It checks reactions constantly, like it's waiting for a signal to breathe. You've seen this in real life. Maybe you've lived it. That moment after you send a message and keep checking your phone. That pause after you say something and immediately wonder if it landed the right way. That feeling of replaying conversations in your head, adjusting yourself after the fact, thinking, maybe I should have said it differently. Maybe I should have been more agreeable. Maybe I should have been less me. And here's the hard truth. People don't respond to that with admiration. Not because they're cruel, but because uncertainty doesn't inspire trust. When you don't trust yourself, others hesitate to trust you too. Psychologists call this external validation dependence. It means your sense of value is regulated from the outside instead of anchored on the inside. Studies in social behavior show that individuals who constantly seek reassurance are often perceived as less confident, even if they're capable, intelligent, or kind. Not because they lack value, but because they don't seem to recognize it themselves. Imagine two people walking into the same room. One looks around, adjusting, scanning faces, changing tone depending on who's watching. The other walks in slowly, no performance, no urgency. They don't need to dominate the room, but they don't disappear either. They take up space naturally. Which one do you notice more? Which one feels solid? That solidity is what people respond to. And it doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from self-trust. Validation seeking often starts early. Maybe you learned that love was conditional. Maybe approval came only when you performed well, behaved well, stayed quiet, stayed useful. So you adapted, you became good at reading people, good at pleasing, good at adjusting. And that skill probably helped you survive. It might have helped you succeed. But survival skills aren't the same as confidence. They're rooted in fear, not freedom. When you seek validation, you're not saying, look how confident I am. You're saying, please confirm that I'm safe. And again, that's human. But here's where the shift happens. Adults don't chase safety in others the way children do. They're drawn to people who already feel safe within themselves. There's a difference between connection and approval. Connection is mutual. Approval is one-sided. When you chase approval, you put the other person above you, even if you don't mean to. You turn them into the judge and yourself into the applicant. And no matter how subtle that imbalance is felt, look at relationships, romantic, professional, even friendships. The person who constantly asks, "Are we okay?" eventually creates tension. The person who needs reassurance after every interaction slowly drains the dynamic. Not because reassurance is wrong, but because confidence is missing. And confidence isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with bravado. It's quiet. It's someone who can sit in silence without panicking. Someone who can say, "This is who I am," without waiting for applause. There's real data behind this. Research on attraction consistently shows that self-assured behavior, measured by calm speech, relaxed posture, and emotional regulation, is rated as more attractive than overt attempts to gain approval. In simple terms, people trust those who trust themselves. Think about leaders you respect. Not the ones who constantly ask for feedback every 5 minutes, but the ones who listen, decide, and stand by their choices. They don't reject input, but they don't depend on it to feel valid. That's the difference. Validation seeking also makes you predictable. When people know you'll always show up, always respond, always explain, always try harder, the mystery disappears. And mystery isn't about games, it's about depth. When everything about you is immediately available, there's no space for curiosity. Confidence creates space, need collapses it. And here's the part most people don't want to hear: when you seek validation, you train others how to treat you. You teach them that your boundaries are flexible, that your worth is negotiable, that you'll stay even when you're not valued, as long as there's a chance of approval at the end. That doesn't inspire respect. It invites complacency. You see this at work all the time. The employee who over-delivers without boundaries is often overlooked, while the one who calmly defines their role is respected. The friend who's always available becomes the last priority. The partner who gives endlessly without self-regard is taken for granted. And it's not because people are evil, it's because humans respond to cues. And the strongest cue you give is how you treat yourself. When you stop seeking validation, you don't become cold. You become clear. You stop explaining your worth and start embodying it. You don't demand respect, you make disrespect uncomfortable. There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when this shift happens. You don't announce it. You don't post about it. You just stop asking. You stop chasing reactions. You stop shaping yourself to fit expectations that were never spoken, but always felt. And something changes. Your voice slows down. Your decisions feel cleaner. You don't rush to fill silence. You don't panic when someone pulls back. You don't overcorrect when someone misunderstands you. You let people have their reactions without making them your responsibility. That's not indifference. That's confidence. And confidence doesn't beg. It doesn't plead its case. It simply exists, solid, present, unapologetic. When you no longer need validation, you don't lose people, you lose illusions. You stop attracting those who feed on your need, and you start attracting those who respect your stability. Because people who are secure are drawn to security, and people who are insecure are unsettled by it. That's the paradox. The moment you stop needing approval is the moment you become approved of. Not by everyone, but by the right ones. Because what people are really drawn to isn't perfection, it's self-trust, and self-trust doesn't ask, "Am I enough?" It says quietly, "I know who I am." There's a strange thing about human attention. The more available something is, the less we notice it. The more predictable it becomes, the less we value it. Not because it loses its worth, but because our minds stop registering it as special. This isn't cruelty, it's conditioning. And it plays out everywhere, quietly shaping how people see you, respond to you, and decide whether to lean in or pull away. Scarcity changes perception because it forces awareness. When something isn't always there, the mind starts asking questions. Where did it go? Why is it missing? What did it mean when it was here? And in those questions, value is created, not artificially, naturally. Think about how this works in everyday life. A song you hear on repeat everywhere eventually fades into background noise. But the song you haven't heard in years, the one that comes on unexpectedly, stops you cold. It takes you somewhere. It matters again. The song didn't change. Your access to it did. People work the same way. When you're always available, always responding, always showing up no matter how little you're appreciated, your presence becomes expected. And what's expected is rarely cherished. It becomes part of the environment like air. Necessary, maybe, but unnoticed. Scarcity doesn't mean disappearing dramatically or playing games. It means having a life so full, so anchored that your attention isn't handed out freely. It means your time has weight, your presence has edges, your energy is not endless, and you respect that. Behavioral psychology calls this the scarcity principle. It's been studied in everything from consumer behavior to relationships. When access is limited, perceived value increases. Not because of manipulation, but because the mind assigns importance to what isn't guaranteed. You see this in professional settings all the time. The person who says yes to every request becomes invisible. The one who sets boundaries, who isn't immediately available, suddenly becomes respected. Their time is treated carefully. Their input carries more weight, not because they're better, but because they're not overextended. In relationships, this principle becomes even more powerful. When you stop chasing, the dynamic shifts. When you stop initiating every conversation, stop being the one who always checks in, always fixes, always reassures, something happens. The space you leave behind doesn't feel empty, it feels loud. And that silence forces reflection. People don't miss you when you're everywhere. They miss you when your presence is no longer guaranteed. There's a story many people share, quietly, almost with disbelief. They say, "The moment I stopped trying so hard, they noticed me." And it feels unfair, almost backwards. But it's not about effort, it's about energy. When you chase, your energy moves outward. When you stop, it returns to you. And people feel that shift even if they can't name it. Scarcity also removes desperation from the equation. Desperation repels because it carries fear. Scarcity, when healthy, carries calm. It says, "I have a life, I have direction. I'm not waiting to be chosen." And that's magnetic. Think about how children respond to attention. When something is constantly available, they get bored. When it's taken away, not as punishment, but naturally, they suddenly want it again. Adults aren't that different, we're just better at hiding it. But scarcity isn't about withholding to provoke longing. It's about alignment. It's about choosing where your energy goes instead of scattering it everywhere, hoping something sticks. Real life example. Think of a friend who was always around, always ready, always answering. Then one day they got busy, not emotionally distant, just engaged in their own growth, their own life, their own priorities. Suddenly, people started reaching out, checking in, making effort. Why? Because effort follows value, and value is recognized when access is limited. There's also a neurological aspect to this. When something is easily accessible, the brain releases less dopamine. When something is uncertain or limited, anticipation increases dopamine response. That's why people feel more drawn to what isn't immediately available. It's not manipulation, it's wiring. When you're always available, you remove anticipation. When you step back, anticipation returns. Scarcity also gives others a chance to invest. When you do all the work, there's no space for them to show effort. And without effort, attachment weakens. People bond through contribution. When you remove the opportunity for contribution, connection fades. By stepping back, you're not rejecting anyone. You're inviting reciprocity. There's strength in restraint, in not rushing to respond, in not over-explaining, in allowing moments to breathe. Silence, when grounded, is not absence. It's presence held back with intention. You start to notice something else when you embrace scarcity. The people who only valued your availability fall away, and the people who value you for you step forward. That sorting process is uncomfortable, but it's honest. Scarcity reveals motives. When you're not always there, you see who comes looking and who doesn't. And that clarity is worth more than any forced connection. There's also dignity in choosing yourself. When you stop giving endlessly, you're not being selfish. You're being sustainable. You're saying, "My energy matters," and people respond to that whether they admit it or not. Think about someone you respect deeply. Chances are they're not endlessly available. They have boundaries, they have a life. And when they choose to give you their time, it feels meaningful. That's what scarcity creates, meaning it teaches others how to value you by how you value yourself. when you stop pouring from an empty cup, when you stop chasing reactions, when you stop trying to be everywhere at once, your presence sharpens. And when you do show up, it lands. People don't chase what's always there. They chase what feels intentional, what feels earned, what feels real. Scarcity doesn't make you less kind. It makes your kindness deliberate. It doesn't make you distant. It makes you centered. And that center is what draws people in, not the effort, not the explanation, not the availability, but the quiet confidence of knowing your presence has weight. When you understand that, you stop fearing absence. You stop fearing silence. You stop fearing being misunderstood for a moment. Because you know that the right people don't need constant access to feel your value. They feel it most when it's not guaranteed. There's a quiet force that doesn't announce itself when it enters a room. It doesn't demand attention or ask to be admired. It doesn't need to be loud, charming, or impressive. You feel it before you understand it. You sense it in the way someone stands still in their own skin, in the way they speak without rushing, in the way they don't bend just to be accepted. That force is self-respect. And when it's real, it creates something powerful, emotional gravity. People often confuse self-respect with ego. They think it means pushing others away, acting superior, or pretending not to care. But true self-respect is the opposite. It's grounded. It's calm. It doesn't need to prove anything because it already knows where it stands. And that knowing, deep, steady, unshakable, pulls people in. You've felt this before. You've met someone who didn't try to impress you, yet somehow left an impression. They didn't overshare. They didn't explain themselves into exhaustion. They listened. They chose their words carefully. And when they spoke, it felt like they meant every word. You walked away feeling something you couldn't name, only knowing they felt solid. That's emotional gravity at work. Self-respect creates that gravity because it sets a tone. It says, without speaking, I value myself, and I expect to be met at that level. People respond to that instinctively, not because they're intimidated, but because clarity feels safe, boundaries feel safe, consistency feels safe. When you don't respect yourself, you compensate, you try harder, you give more, you tolerate things you shouldn't. You explain your boundaries instead of holding them, and in doing that, you weaken your own center. People feel that instability, even if they can't articulate it. Think about how often people over-explain when they're afraid of being misunderstood. They add context, justification, apologies, sometimes for things that don't require any. That over-explaining doesn't come from kindness. It comes from doubt, from the fear that if you don't convince someone, you'll be rejected. Self-respect doesn't convince, it states. It sounds like, this is what I'm available for. This is what I'm not. This is what matters to me. And then it stops talking. There's power in that silence. It allows others to decide how they'll meet you. And that choice reveals everything. In psychology, there's a concept tied to this called emotional containment. People with high self-respect can hold their emotions without spilling them everywhere. They don't react impulsively. They don't chase reassurance. They don't collapse when there's tension. That containment makes others feel secure, and security is attractive. You see this clearly in relationships. The person who doesn't beg to be chosen is often the one remembered the longest. The one who can walk away without bitterness leaves a deeper imprint than the one who stays at any cost. Not because they're colder, but because they honor themselves. Self-respect also changes how conflict feels. When you respect yourself, you don't need to win every argument. You don't need to be right all the time. You don't need to convince someone to see your value. You know it already. That frees you to speak honestly and listen openly. And that honesty carries weight. People lean toward those who don't crumble under pressure, who don't twist themselves to maintain approval, who don't abandon themselves to keep someone else comfortable. That steadiness creates gravity. There's also a neurological component to this. Humans are wired to seek stability. The nervous system relaxes around people who are emotionally regulated, those who don't swing wildly between over-giving and withdrawal. Self-respect creates regulation. It keeps you anchored, and others feel that anchor. Think of a time when you lost respect for someone, not because they were unkind, but because they didn't protect themselves. Maybe they tolerated disrespect. Maybe they kept going back to situations that drained them. Maybe they said yes when their body clearly said no. Over time, something shifted, not because they became less worthy, but because they stopped honoring themselves. Respect, including self-respect, teaches people how to treat you. When you respect yourself, you don't chase closure, you don't demand explanations, you don't linger where you're not valued, you leave quietly with dignity, and that quiet departure often echoes louder than any argument. There's a story many people share after a breakup or a turning point. They say, "The moment I stopped pleading and just walked away, that's when they reached out." Not because walking away is a tactic, but because self-respect is felt immediately when it's activated. Self-respect creates contrast. It highlights what was taken for granted. It introduces absence without bitterness. And absence combined with dignity has weight. You don't have to announce your standards. You live them. You don't threaten to leave. You simply do when necessary. And that consistency builds trust, not just with others, but with yourself. And when you trust yourself, something inside you relaxes. You stop scanning for approval. You stop negotiating your needs. You stop asking, "Am I too much?" or "Am I not enough?" Those questions fade because they're no longer relevant. You're aligned. Alignment is magnetic. People are drawn to those who are aligned because it reflects something they often struggle to find in themselves. It shows them what it looks like to stand firm without being rigid, to be open without being self-abandoning. Self-respect also deepens your presence. When you're not worried about being liked, you're fully there. You listen better. You respond thoughtfully. You're not rehearsing your next move in your head. That presence is rare, and rare things draw attention. There's also courage in self-respect. It takes courage to disappoint others in order to stay true to yourself. It takes courage to say no without guilt, to walk away without drama, to choose peace over familiarity. That courage doesn't shout, it hums, and people feel it. Emotional gravity isn't about being mysterious or distant. It's about being solid. It's about having an inner center that doesn't shift with every reaction. When you have that, people orbit naturally, not because you pull them, but because they feel steady near you. And here's the quiet truth self. Respect doesn't guarantee people will stay. Some will leave. Some will resist. Some will test you. But the ones who remain will meet you with the same depth you offer yourself. And that kind of connection is lighter, cleaner, more real. When you respect yourself, you don't ask to be valued, you demonstrate it. And that demonstration speaks louder than any explanation ever could. People don't fall toward desperation. They fall toward dignity, toward calm strength, toward someone who knows when to hold on and when to let go. That's emotional gravity, and it begins the moment you decide you are worth standing up for, especially in your own eyes. There's a moment that feels like loss at first. It doesn't arrive loudly. It comes quietly, almost like exhaustion. You stop explaining yourself. You stop chasing clarity. You stop trying to control how others see you. Not because you don't care, but because something inside you finally gets tired of carrying weight that was never yours to hold. That moment is detachment. And detachment doesn't mean indifference. It means honesty. Most people fear detachment because they confuse it with abandonment. They think letting go means giving up, failing, or closing their heart. But real detachment is none of that. It's the moment you step back just enough to see things clearly, without distortion, without hope blinding you, without fear bargaining on your behalf. When you're attached, you edit yourself, you tolerate confusion, you make excuses for behavior that hurts you because you're invested in the outcome. You stay longer than you should because you're focused on potential instead of reality. Attachment keeps you close, but it also keeps you foggy. Detachment clears the fog. The moment you stop forcing connection, truth starts speaking. And it doesn't whisper, It reveals itself through actions, through silence, through who steps forward and who disappears. When you detach, you stop asking, why are they doing this? And you start seeing, this is what they're choosing. That shift changes everything. Think about how often people stay stuck because they're chasing explanations. They want closure. They want answers. They want the other person to admit something, to understand something, to validate something. But detachment teaches you a harder, cleaner lesson. Explanations don't change behavior. Only distance reveals it. When you stop reaching out, some people rush back, not because they suddenly understand your value, but because they feel the absence of your energy. Others don't return at all, and that's not rejection, that's information. Detachment gives you information you could never get while you were emotionally entangled. You start noticing patterns you ignored before. Who initiates? Who reciprocates? Who only shows up when it's convenient? Who listens and who just waits for their turn to speak? When you were attached, you explained these things away. When you detach, you don't need to. You see them as they are. This is why detachment feels uncomfortable. It removes illusion, and illusions are comforting, even when they hurt us. There's a quiet pain in realizing that some people didn't value you. They valued what you gave, your attention, your patience, your forgiveness, your emotional labor. Detachment takes that away, and without it, the relationship either deepens or dissolves. Both outcomes are truth. Psychologically, detachment regulates your nervous system. When you're attached, your emotions are reactive. You're constantly scanning for signals, tone changes, delayed replies, subtle shifts. Your body stays tense because it's waiting. Detachment releases that tension. It brings you back into your body, back into the present, back into yourself. And from that grounded place, clarity emerges. You stop romanticizing effort that isn't mutual. You stop defending people who don't defend you. You stop chasing emotional breadcrumbs and calling it connection. Detachment sharpens your perception. There's a reason people often say, once I stopped caring so much, I finally saw the truth. It's not that they stopped caring, it's that they stopped investing. They stopped pouring into something that wasn't pouring back. Detachment also reveals your own patterns. You start seeing where you abandoned yourself, where you stayed silent to keep peace, where you settled for less because you were afraid of losing someone. That awareness can sting, but it's also empowering. Because once you see it, you can choose differently. And here's the part most people don't expect. Detachment doesn't push away the right people. It brings them closer. The people who genuinely care don't require you to chase them. They don't disappear when you stop giving. They don't punish you for having boundaries. When you detach, those relationships feel lighter, easier, more balanced. There's space to breathe. The others, they fade, or they resist, or they try to pull you back into old dynamics. And that reaction tells you everything you need to know. Detachment exposes motives. If someone only shows up when you're available, agreeable, and accommodating, detachment removes their access, and without access, their interest reveals itself. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. There's also power in no longer needing to be understood by everyone. Detachment frees you from the exhausting need to explain your feelings to people who aren't listening. You stop arguing with reality. You stop trying to make someone see what they're not ready to see. You let them be where they are. And in doing so, you finally meet yourself where you are. There's a quiet confidence that comes with detachment. Not arrogance, not coldness, just self-trust. You trust that you'll be okay even if someone walks away. You trust that peace is more important than proving a point. You trust that what's meant for you won't require self-betrayal. That trust changes how you move. You respond instead of react. You pause instead of panic. You observe instead of assume. And people feel that shift immediately. Detachment also teaches patience. Not passive waiting, but grounded patience. You allow situations to unfold instead of forcing outcomes. And when you stop forcing, truth surfaces naturally. Silence becomes revealing. Distance becomes informative. Time becomes honest. You don't need to interrogate anyone. You don't need to demand answers. You just watch. And what you see is real. There's a certain peace that comes when you realize you don't need everyone to choose you. You only need to choose yourself. Detachment is the act of stepping back and saying, I will no longer abandon myself to keep something that isn't aligned. That decision changes the energy completely. People sense when you're no longer gripping tightly, when you're no longer afraid to lose. That lack of fear isn't threatening, it's grounding. It tells others that you're whole on your own. And wholeness doesn't beg. Detachment doesn't close your heart, it protects it. It allows you to love without losing yourself, to care without collapsing, to be present without being consumed. And in that space between holding on and letting go, truth stands up on its own. No excuses, no narratives, no justifications, just reality. And once you see reality clearly, you stop chasing illusions. You stop fighting what is. You stop wasting energy on what can't meet you where you stand. Detachment doesn't take anything from you. It gives you back your clarity, your peace, your power. And from that place, you don't need to ask what's real. You can feel it. There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when something inside you shifts. You stop reaching outward for permission. You stop waiting for someone else to decide your worth. You stop asking, is this okay? Am I enough? Do they choose me? And instead, you turn inward and say, I choose myself. That moment changes everything. Not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily, like gravity pulling things into alignment. When you choose yourself, you don't become louder. You don't become harder. You don't become colder. You become clearer. And clarity has a pull that confusion never will. Most people spend their lives trying to be magnetic by doing more, saying the right things, being more agreeable, more impressive, more available. They think magnetism comes from effort, from performance, from proving. But real magnetism doesn't come from chasing attention. It comes from being anchored. When you choose yourself, your energy stops leaking. You're no longer scattered, trying to be everything to everyone. You're no longer split between who you are and who you think you need to be. That integration, that wholeness, is what people feel when they're around you. You've felt it in others. Someone walks into a room and doesn't demand attention, yet somehow the room adjusts. Conversations slow down. People listen more closely. There's no show, no urgency, just presence. That presence comes self-choosing. Choosing yourself means honoring your time, your energy, your values. It means you don't abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable. You don't stay in conversations that drain you. You don't shrink your truth to fit into someone else's expectations. And that restraint, that self-loyalty, creates a kind of calm authority. People are drawn to those who aren't at war with themselves. There's neuroscience behind this. Humans subconsciously mirror emotional states. When you're regulated, grounded, and secure, others feel safer around you. Their nervous systems relax, and safety is magnetic. Not excitement built on chaos, but the deeper pull of stability. When you choose yourself, you stop seeking validation, and something unexpected happens. People start offering it freely. Not because you asked, but because you no longer need it. Need repels. Self-sufficiency attracts. Think about relationships. The moment someone stops begging to be chosen, stops chasing reassurance, stops negotiating their worth, something shifts. The dynamic equalizes, or it ends. And either outcome is honest. Choosing yourself means you're willing to lose what doesn't align in order to protect what does. That willingness is felt. It tells others, I'm not afraid to stand alone. And paradoxically, that's when you're no longer alone. There's a quiet confidence in someone who knows they'll be okay regardless of the outcome. They don't rush. They don't cling. They don't panic when there's silence. They trust themselves to handle whatever comes next. That trust is magnetic because it reflects strength without aggression. Choosing yourself also changes how you speak. You stop over-explaining. You stop apologizing for existing. Your words become fewer, but they land deeper. You don't need to convince. You don't need to argue. You state what's true for you and allow others to respond as they will. That grounded communication creates respect. People don't chase those who chase them. They chase those who are walking their own path, fully engaged, fully present, fully alive. When you choose yourself, your life stops orbiting around reactions. It starts orbiting around purpose. And purpose is attractive. It doesn't matter what that purpose is: art, work, growth, healing, building a family, finding peace. What matters is that it's yours. When you're aligned with it, your energy changes. You move with intention instead of desperation. You act from choice instead of fear. Fear says, don't lose them. Choice says, I won't lose myself. That distinction is everything. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you don't care about others. It means you care without self-betrayal. You love without collapsing. You give without emptying yourself. And people feel that balance. It invites reciprocity. There's also a deep dignity in choosing yourself. It's not flashy. It's not loud. It's quiet decisions made over and over again. Saying no when you mean no. Leaving when it hurts to stay. Resting when you're tired. Speaking up when silence costs you too much. Those choices build self-trust. And self-trust changes how you carry yourself. Your posture shifts. Your gaze steadies. Your voice slows. You're no longer seeking approval. You're offering presence. And presence is rare. When you choose yourself, you stop chasing people who are unsure about you. You stop investing in potential instead of reality. You stop trying to earn love through effort. You allow love to meet you where you stand, or not at all. That boundary is magnetic because it's honest. Some people will step closer when you choose yourself. They'll feel inspired. They'll feel invited to rise. Others will pull away because your self-respect exposes their lack of clarity. Both reactions are revealing. Neither is your responsibility. What changes most is how you feel inside. There's a quiet peace that comes from knowing you didn't abandon yourself today. That peace shows. It softens your edges without weakening your core. It makes you approachable without making you available to disrespect. Choosing yourself also frees you from comparison. When you're aligned with your own path, other people's approval loses its grip. You stop measuring yourself against standards that were never meant for you. You become harder to manipulate because you're no longer hungry for acceptance. That inner fullness is magnetic because it doesn't ask to be filled. People sense when you're content in your own company, when you're not waiting for someone to complete you. When you enjoy your life as it is, that enjoyment sends a signal, I am whole, and wholeness attracts. You don't need to announce that you've chosen yourself. You don't need to explain it. You live it. In your boundaries, in your pace, in your decisions, in the way you walk away from what diminishes you without hatred. And the world responds, not immediately, not perfectly, but consistently. When you choose yourself, you become magnetic, not because you're trying to pull people in, but because you've stopped pushing yourself away. Your energy returns home. And from that home, everything that's meant to find you can. So remember this. Stop chasing approval. Stop auditioning for love. Stop negotiating your worth. Stand still. Stand grounded. Stand honest. Because the moment you stop seeking validation, you don't lose people. You find yourself, and the ones who truly matter, they'll feel it, and they'll come closer on their own.